Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be heading back to Eternia with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, number 5. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 2013, we see here on the front cover a pretty good-looking image of He-Man being attacked by Cringer. We get the Sword of Power in the background, in front of the face of the sorceress, just kind of looking ethereal. Overall, I like the look of it. The only problem I have is that it doesn't fully represent the story inside this book accurately, and you'll understand what I mean when we get to that part once we look inside. Now this, of course, being a DC book, we open up to see an ad front and center on the inside cover. I do find it interesting that this ad for this book by The Onion says the perfect gift for an encyclopedia file, as we see the border is most likely a Christmas tree with Christmas lights going around it. There's just one problem. As I stated before, this book was published in February, 2 months after Christmas, so somebody got their wires crossed somewhere. Getting to the credits. We have written by Keith Griffin, pencils by Popmon and Philip Tan, inks by Popmon, Jim, boy, I'm going to try, Charalampidis, I think, maybe, and LeBeau Underwood. Colors by Lee Loffridge and Jim Charalampidis. Letters by Sadia, or Seda? Temafonte? I'm sorry, Seda, I'm pronouncing your name completely wrong. Editing by Michael McAllister and cover by Dave Wilkins. We see here that the book picks up exactly where it left off as we see Adam falling off of the energy bridge into the fire-filled cauldron as he and Teela were forced to do battle with one another for the entertainment of Evil-Lyn. Teela then falls to her knees in sorrow, believing that Adam has died, and then Evil-Lyn begins to cackle maniacally, laughing at Teela's pain, almost relishing in it, which is just a little bit of a picture into the psyche of Evil-Lyn and how, kind of off her rocker she is. But then she stands up stating that Teela's a fool, that the cauldron feeds on blood, and the more blood spilled, the more substantial the flames become. She then uses her magic to pull Adam back up out of the fire as we see he's completely unharmed. She drops Adam back on the bridge as she states that the last combatants fought all the way until dawn before they finally fell and were consumed by the flames. Teela, shocked, says, Adam, the flames, they're an illusion, to which Adam responds, yeah, I'm fine, thanks for asking. But she then states, Adam, come on, I'm serious. He states that the flames are not entirely an illusion, that there was heat, but it was faint. Meaning the longer that this is drawn out, the more likely the flame's intensity is to grow, and that he believes this is Evil-Lyn's way of slow roasting the two of them. Teela responds by saying, good. Adam is shocked by this, but she states, no, it's good that you've decided that this isn't just some all-or-nothing, winner-take-all type of game, that you were going to just sacrifice yourself to save me, because there are no winners here. She intends to kill us both. However, their conversation is interrupted when, I guess, either an arrow or a crossbow bolt or perhaps a dart from a blowgun hits Adam in the leg, and Evil-Lyn screams at them to continue fighting. She then tells them that, she plans on being entertained all through the night, and Adam and Teela realize that their situation hasn't really gotten any better despite the fact that they're both still alive. So they begin to keep up the charade once more as they start, fighting against each other, quote unquote, as they try to devise a plan. Teela asks if Adam has any ideas, and he says he does, but it's not one that she's going to like, as when he fell into the flames, he noticed that the cauldron doesn't completely fill the cone that it's in, and that there's a small gap between the cone that the cauldron sits in and the cauldron itself. But it's not going to be easy for them to use that to escape. Teela is absolutely not on board with this idea as she continues to pretend to fight with Adam, stating that there's only about a 3-foot gap between the wall of the cone and the wall of the cauldron, and from the height that they're going to be dropping, if they hit either one of these things, they're likely to get really injured, either landing headfirst and breaking their necks, or landing feet first and breaking their legs. She also points out to Adam that he doesn't know exactly what's under the cauldron either. But Adam believes that this is their only option, so without warning, he just grabs Tila and throws her off the side and tells her to roll when she hits, which is, not necessarily the best way that they could have gone about this plan. Tila falls and thuds against the wall of the cone and begins to roll with it as she is none too happy about the fact that Adam's just doing this all on his own and ignoring any of her input. We then get an advertisement for Geek Magazine. I don't recall ever seeing one of these magazines, and if you told me today that this magazine in March of 2025, when I'm recording this video, no longer exists, I'd believe you wholesale, because magazines seem to be going out of business, every single day at this point, and it seems like one that's this niche probably isn't making the cut. At least, I'm guessing. Adam wastes no time in following Tila as he leaps from the bridge and impacts the wall of the cone as he once again rolls beside her, as Tila screams, "I hate you," as she falls. We then see Evelyn standing shocked and her mouth agape, and then she becomes enraged, stating that the two of them have broken all of the rules and that they're not allowed to try and escape. She then screams at Man-at-Arms to go find them. He tries to tell her that they're most certainly dead from the fall, but she is just shaking with anger, so he says, "Fine, I'll go look for them." But then under his breath, he states, "As if there was any way you could keep me from going to look for her. I can't imagine why that I feel so compelled to do it, though," as he's still under a spell and does not realize that Tila is actually his real daughter. We then get an advertisement for Arrow on the CW, of course, in the year 2025. When I'm recording this, Arrow has long since finished its run. It was a fine show for what it was. It had its moments, some of them good, some of them bad. But in terms of, superhero long-running television series, I've definitely seen a lot worse. So, if you are interested in checking out Arrow here in the future and you've never seen it, give it a try. You may like it. And if you've already seen it and you hated it, yeah, I kind of understand you too. Below the cauldron, we see that there's actually a spiraling chasm that both Tila and Adam are working their way down. Tila is still very mad at Adam as she slowly counts to what he believes 10, but she informs him is actually 100, because she said at 10, she's still furious and wants to hit him in the face. But Adam reminds her that, hey, they've made an escape, or at least have gotten themselves away from the cauldron, and that she should be somewhat grateful. However, Tila states, there was no way that you knew any of this was down here. And he concurs that that's the truth of the matter. But, they had to do something as they begin to make their way down the spiral. Apparently there's some writing on the wall, but it's never depicted in any of the illustrations. So maybe that was just some kind of mistake. And Tila asks if Adam can read any of it. He, of course, states that he can't. But he's hoping that it's just generalized information and not some warning that they should be staying away from wherever they're headed to and that they're walking into horrible, imminent danger, as we see Zor slowly following behind. Meanwhile, back at Castle Grayskull, we see that Skeletor is being informed by Evelyn that the two have escaped. This, of course, is not sitting well with him, but Evelyn is, again, very nonchalant about it and says, you're not going to make a whole thing about this, are you? Showing that she's the only one of Skeletor's minions who does not fear him in any way. Anytime we saw Beastman or Trapjaw or Merman fail in their missions earlier on in the series, they were legitimately terrified of incurring Skeletor's wrath, and they were groveling at his feet, begging him not to harm them. Whereas Evelyn shows literally no fear whatsoever. Skeletor asks, well, you're going to hunt them down and find them, right? Like, immediately? And at this point, Evelyn, once again showing her defiance, says, I'm not sure I appreciate your tone. Skeletor's, starting to get really impatient and says, just answer the question. And she says, yes, fine, sooner rather than later. There, are you happy now? They would have never even escaped had it not been for that bird knocking Adam off of the bridge. At this point, Skeletor's interest is piqued when he hears this, and he says, "Bird? What bird?" We then get an advertisement for Mad Magazine, and I think Mad Magazine still exists. I want to say they declared bankruptcy at some point or another, but I do recall seeing one on the shelf not that long ago. But then again, who knows? I mean, maybe they're owned by somebody else. Maybe they just put out an issue quarterly or something. I don't keep up with Mad Magazine if that's not apparent, but I kind of hope they're still around. They're one of those really long-running magazines that I'd hate to see disappear. We then see the sorceress chained to the wall in her cell as the door slams open and we see Skeletor make a beeline for her saying, "How dare you?" There's only one way you could have been helping the two of them, and that's if you were hiding in my mind. Where in my mind were you hiding? The sorceress defiantly says, "Took you long enough to realize." And Skeletor says, "I demand to know where. Where have you been hiding?" And she says, "I wasn't hiding. I was actually in plain sight had you known where to look." He once again screams where, and she states, "A pleasant memory, such a place that you so rarely revisit in your mind that it was easy for me to remain out of sight," which is kind of a unique insight and look into the psyche of Skeletor, that not only is he obsessed with conquest and doing his evil deeds, he's so evil that he's at the point where he doesn't even revisit pleasant memories in his past. He's just so committed to being the bad guy, which is really a unique way to portray the villain of your story. We then get an advertisement for Batman, Night of the Owls, the trade paperback. Now, if you buy this trade paper, I believe it has the complete Night of the Owls story from all of the different books that it crossed over through, and that's fine. However, if you were subscribing to books and buying them in real time, I can't remember, but you had to buy something like 10 or more different Bat titles, and you had to buy every single Bat title and then maybe a few other books, I can't remember, to get the entire storyline. It was the most shameless cash grab I think I can remember in recent comic book history. Like, because I subscribed to the main Batman book at that time simply because Greg Capullo was the artist on it, and those of you who watch the channel know I'm a huge Greg Capullo fan. And I remember there was specifically a book where you turned the page and there was a 2-hour gap in the timeline. And it said that in order to find out what happened in that 2-hour gap, you had to buy one of the other Bat titles to get that part of the story. At which point I said, "Hell no, DC, screw you." And I canceled my subscription to Batman the very next week because I was so pissed off about the fact that they were trying to just force your hand into buying complete other books that you weren't subscribed to. I mean, it was so infuriating. And it's the kind of stuff that still to this day keeps me away from really caring that much about companies like DC and Marvel and the stuff that they're doing. Back to the story, we see Teela and Adam trying to figure out how they're going to get through this doorway. And Teela says, "I guess we can just try and brute force it," as she puts her hand on the side and then looks at Adam and says, "Oh no, don't worry, I've got this. Don't bother trying to help." The dynamic between Teela and Adam is kind of crazy throughout this whole series, as throughout the entirety of the He-Man universe, Teela has always kind of ribbed Adam and been a little bit, just generally giving him crap. But this comic book seems to take it to a whole new level. There's a difference between general ribbing and just flat out bullying someone. And in this book, it just seems like Teela is always on Adam's case and just constantly demeaning him. Even though, they do try to point out that she does somewhat care for his well-being, as we saw earlier in this issue, where she was, really concerned and saddened by the fact that she thought he had died. But like I said, even when he comes back, she immediately shows no concern whatsoever. She's like, "Oh, you're fine. No worries. I'm just going to start treating you like crap again." Adam decides to help her and then places his hand on the door. However, this illuminates all the lettering on the circumference of the door, and then a bright light begins to glow and emit from the door as Teela says, "What did you do?" And he's like, "I don't know. I just touched the door and this started." He's like, "I really hope what's happening is not something that's, super dangerous and ominous, and what's on the other side of this door is going to be really good for us. Cross your fingers." Then, what do you know? We're greeted by yet another ad, this time for Batman the Dark Knight. I was not subscribed to this book. Obviously, this cover shows us that whatever storyline was going on was happening with the Mad Hatter. If you did read this book, let us know in the comments if it was any good. I'm generally interested. It wasn't something I was reading at the time. Then the door starts to illuminate and glow even more and move itself out of the way. Adam is shocked and states, "Are you seeing this?" And Tila's like, "Wow, remind me to never shake hands with you." Adam's surprised and says, "You think I did this?" And Tila's like, "Well, it didn't move when I touched it." However, they're then stunned when they see the Sword of Power, which they don't recognize, stuck in a stalagmite coming out of the floor of the middle of the room. Tila is wondering what it is, and Adam says it's the answer. It's the answer to all of our problems. And Tila's like, "You think so?" And Adam says, "No, I know so." As the two of them approach the Sword of Power, they're interrupted when they hear a low growling rumble, and Tila states to Adam, "I certainly hope that was your stomach." However, it wasn't his stomach, as the two of them are then ambushed by none other than Cringer. Tila jumps out of the way, but Cringer grabs Adam and starts to try and rip him to shreds. Tila begins to panic and search frantically for a weapon to try and fight this massive beast that they don't recognize, and Cringer doesn't recognize them either. He's under the spell as well. And she looks over towards the sword. However, before she can reach it, Adam, actually to his credit, just socks Cringer in the nose as hard as he can. And as Cringer lets him go, Adam is happy to know that he hurt the beast. I really do appreciate how big Cringer is drawn here. I mean, if you can see right here in this panel, his arm is roughly the same size as Adam's whole body, just giving him massive size, which I like because it does distinguish him from being different than a tiger we would have here on Earth. Granted, tigers on Earth are pretty big, but they're not like this big. I mean, this is enormous. I like the idea that, he's not just green. He is a tiger from a different world where he's much larger and much fiercer. I don't know if it's going to stay this way throughout the whole series, though. I can't remember. It's been so long since I've read it. And I should point out that if you have a keener eye, you may have noticed that these pages have far more detail in them than the ones earlier in the book. And that's because we've reached the part of the book that's being drawn by Philip Tan, who, in my opinion, is a far better artist than Popmon. Popmon is someone who winds up doing quite a bit of work on this title, and I wish he hadn't, quite frankly. I don't hate Popmon's artwork, but it's definitely far from my favorite artwork. Quite sadly, I would say that Popmon's artwork is serviceable at best and amateur at its worst, and I really question how he has a job working full-time, or had a job. I don't know if he's still working at DC, working full-time for one of the larger, comic book publishers in the world. It seems as though his artwork is something that's, you would see in an independent title, not one of the big two. But I guess somebody at DC was impressed enough to give him a job. It certainly would not have been me if I was in that position. We then find yet another ad. And what do you know? 2 full pages of another ad. Because, of course, this is, of course, promoting the Justice League and Aquaman crossover event. Now, this kind of illustrates what I was talking about earlier with why I stopped subscribing to Batman at that time, showing that, again, DC is trying to force people's hands into buying multiple books that maybe they didn't want. Like, let's say that you're a big Aquaman fan and you're subscribed to Aquaman and you've been buying those books every month. Well, guess what? If you want to get the entire Throne of Atlantis story, there are 3 issues of Justice League that you have to buy, 15, 16, and 17, in order to get this entire story. Whether or not you're subscribed to Justice League and have any interest is irrelevant, because if you want this entire Aquaman story, you're going to have to buy these 3 issues, which is just, I don't know, it just feels such like a scummy way to do business, to try and force people to buy other books that maybe they don't care about in the least. I'm not saying that Aquaman can't be having adventures with the Justice League. I'm just saying that, he can have his own independent adventures that don't have to involve the Justice League, and, force you to buy Justice League books. But I guess that's not the way that DC was trying to make money. But, call it what you will. I personally can't stand when companies do this kind of thing. However, as Adam gets to his feet, he looks at Cringer and states, "Oh, and now I've made him mad. Why do I get the feeling that things are about to get a lot worse?" This is where Tila starts to lose her cool and states, "Would you stop narrating the fight and save your breath? We've got to figure this out," as she makes a beeline to the Sword of Power. However, she is cut off by Cringer, who lunges towards her. She jumps out of the way and swears in comic book swear symbols. Adam says, "Well put, you kiss your father with that mouth," as he jumps on the back of Cringer and starts pulling his ears, which is just irritating him. I like how expressive his face is right here. As he's riding Cringer like a bull at this point, Tila says, "I'll let that slide, seeing as how you're about to be eaten by that thing." And as she starts to figure out what she's going to do, she's grabbed from behind by none other than Man-at-Arms, who has caught up to her along with the other soldiers that were sent by Evelyn. He tells her not to struggle as he's coming with them. However, he's shocked himself to see Cringer and Adam, as he had no idea that Cringer was being held captive under the castle, and even states, "What in the world is that thing? I've never..." It's hilarious to me that not only did he not know Cringer was here, he had no idea that such a creature even existed. Maybe Cringer is the last of the Eternian tigers, but it is funny to me that he's just completely caught off guard by the idea that this type of creature existed on Eternia. Oh, what do you know? It's that time again, ad o'clock, as we see yet another ad, this time for the Justice League Volume 2 hardcover trade paper. I mean, I get it, you gotta sell books, but apparently you have to sell books on every other page. Meanwhile, back to the story, we see that Tila is screaming at Man-at-Arms and the other soldiers to help Adam. However, Man-at-Arms says, "There's no way we're getting involved with this. Our orders were to bring you two back dead or alive. We'll come back later for his bones after that cat is finished." One of the soldiers then makes a joke, "Yeah, we could probably make a chair out of him." As Man-at-Arms grabs Tila and carries her off, she looks back and screams, "No, Adam, Adam," as she does seem genuinely concerned that he's in mortal danger. As the group then leaves Adam to fight Cringer, Adam realizes that at this point, he's on his own and he has to go for broke if he's going to try and survive. So he runs as fast as he can over towards the Sword of Power and grabs it with both hands, desperately trying to free it, as Cringer catches up and pounces on top of him. However, Cringer catches Adam and buries his claws into Adam's back, causing Adam to scream out in pain as he desperately tries to free the sword. Cringer then starts clawing and ripping at Adam's back, as Adam states this is a stupid way to die. However, at this point, the Sword of Power magically comes free, and there's a huge burst of energy, as things are about to get very different in this storyline. And, good, another ad. I was worried there for a minute we wouldn't see anymore. Green Lantern, Volume 2 trade paper is what this one's for. This is apparently The Revenge of Black Hand. I wasn't reading Green Lantern at this point. I have nothing against Green Lantern. I like his character. In fact, Green Lantern is probably one of the DC characters I like the most. I really like the way his power set works and, how unique it is. But again, another ad interrupting the story of this book. If you knew anything about this story, feel free to talk about it in the comments below, because I'd like to know more about it myself. Instinctively, Adam raises the sword above his head, shouting the words, "By the power of Grayskull, I have the power," and transforms into He-Man once again. However, this not only transforms Adam into He-Man, it also breaks the spell that everyone was under, as suddenly Man-at-Arms and Tila recognize each other and know that they are father and daughter. And also, all of the villains realize that the spell is broken, as Evelyn is enraged, and we see Merman and Trapjaw both realizing that Skeletor is going to be furious. We see that Merman states, "Oh no, he's triumphed." And Trapjaw kind of has the right idea here, as he states to the rest of his caravan, "Hey, we got to get moving because we want to be as far away from Skeletor as possible. I don't want to incur his wrath." And we even see King Randor walk out of a small, modest home as he is searching for his son. He just says, Adam. And one of the villagers recognizes him as the king and is like, oh my God, Majesty. And we then at the very bottom see Skeletor just reaching his hand to the sky, enraged, realizing that his spell is broken. But he also is not fearful. He welcomes the challenge and states, before your combined might wasn't enough to stop me. And last time I just stole your memories. This time I'll take your lives. As he's basically saying, bring it. I'm going to fight you tooth and nail, and I'm going to win once again as we reach the end of the story in this issue. We then get an ad for DC collectibles, both action figures and statues and mini busts. I actually did like these little mini busts that were being put out. I didn't buy a whole lot of them. I specifically bought the Grifter mini bust, which is fantastic. And, despite the fact that I'm not a huge DC guy, you do know that I am a big Grifter guy. And if I've got an opportunity to buy a Grifter statue, especially one that wasn't that expensive, it was like $50 or something like that, sign me up. I'm in, and I couldn't be happier with having it. It's a fantastic little mini bust, and I'm glad that, DC had it made, as this is one of the few points where they were really trying to push one of the Wildstorm characters in the mainstream DC universe. We then get to DC All Access, and actually this one doesn't have much to it. It's basically just saying, hey, thanks for making 2012 great. We're hard at work to have a great 2013. Hope to see you there. Which, I don't know, seems like a waste of paper. You may as well have printed another ad on there if that's all you were going to write. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an ad for Impractical Jokers, which, as I'm recording this video in 2025, this show is still on the air. And I find it hilarious that it's even calling the network True TV still in this point in time. You may as well just call it the Impractical Jokers channel, because it seems like that's all they run all the time. But, I mean, if people are watching, you may as well, make your money where you can get it while you can. But, I mean, come on, guys, do you have anything going besides Impractical Jokers? Try and make at least one other show that people want to watch. And that was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, issue number 5. Overall, I have no complaints about the story of this issue. I thought it did a fantastic job of showing Adam and Teela escape Evelyn, Adam finding his way to the Sword of Power, fighting against Cringer, freeing the sword, breaking the spell that everyone was under, and setting the stage for the battle between the Masters of the Universe and all of the forces of evil that's about to be going on in the near future. My only real complaint is that, again, this is where Popmon starts to become a featured artist on this series. And as I stated, I'm no fan of his work. Granted, he's not the worst comic book artist I've ever seen, but he's far from the best. And it's always disappointing when there's a title that you really, really like and care about, and it's being penciled by an artist that you don't care for at all. It sucks, because you really want to buy the book and you want to love everything about it, but the artwork just does nothing for you. It sucks so bad when you're stuck in that kind of a problem. And it happens a lot if you're someone who reads comic books. Very frequently you wind up with either a writer you don't like being on the book or an artist you don't like being on the book. And you just kind of have to take those lumps because you care about the book as a whole. But, you're still spending your hard-earned money once a month to buy a product that you like, but you want it to be better. But then again, these are just my opinions. Maybe you're someone who likes Popmon's artwork and you think that he's great being on this book. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.